My name is Gordon McKinley. I'm an senior account executive at ATP. ATP is a woman-owned small business, and we are very proud to be offering this webinar today. In the Preso today, we're focusing really on two OEMs, BlastWave and Dragos. And BlastWave is a cutting-edge cybersecurity company, and it specializes in zero trust network access solutions. And these solutions protect critical infrastructure, enterprises, and remote workforces. They have a patented technology providing secure, frictionless access by combining software-defined perimeters, multi-factor authentication, and continuous monitoring. BlastWave's mission is to eliminate lateral movement, reducing attack surfaces, stopping breaches before they happen, and empowering organizations to operate with the confidence they need in increasingly hostile digital environments with brand new threat vectors. Speaker for BlastWave today is Cam Cullen. Cam Cullen currently serves as the Chief Marketing Officer of BlastWave. He has 20 years of experience in telecom, internet app, and network security, and he brings a deep technical pedigree in marketing to this role. Both speakers today are U.S. veterans. Cam served in the Air Force and at the NSA. Dragos is the global leader in industrial cybersecurity. They're focused on safeguarding critical infrastructure and operational technology, or OT, environments, which is very different from IT environments. Dragos was founded by former NSA and ICS experts, and they provide a combination of threat intelligence, incident response, and their award-winning Dragos platform to detect, respond to, and mitigate cyber threats. The company works across industries such as energy, manufacturing, water, transportation, all these organizations, and they reduce risk while maintaining reliability and resilience in essential ops. The speaker at Dragos we have today is Chris Manrique. Chris also served in the Air Force and is a senior pre-sales solution architect within the federal sector. Chris has a strong foundation in cybersecurity with extensive experience in industrial control systems, security, pre-sales engineering, and technical account management. On the ATP side, we have Eric Montrestelli. And Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you to try to set the stage for why we're bringing these two OEMs together. Eric, go ahead.
Thanks, Gordon. Appreciate the introductions. So everybody, let's start off with a brief explanation of operational technology. I'm assuming that if you're attending today's session, you probably understand what OT is. And in simple terms, we're referring to systems that run our physical world. We're talking both the hardware and the software that power everything from factory lines, oil rigs, to HVAC systems, as well as access controls within your facilities and your critical infrastructure. But more specifically, NIST defines OT as programmable systems or devices that interact with the physical environment, that detect or cause a direct change through the monitoring or control of devices, processes, and events. And therein lies our bigger talking point for today's webinar. These systems that were previously isolated are now more connected than ever. And bad actors are taking advantage of that interconnectivity between OT and IT systems. And as many of you have probably heard in recent years, there's been some high-profile ransomware attacks that emanated through OT systems like the Colonial Pipeline, Volt Typhoon, and JBS Foods. But without going into all the gritty details of those breaches, let's just say that OT environments are a growing security risk. And when we look to traditional perimeter defense, it's no longer holding up. And that's where OT zero trust solutions like Dragos and BlastWave come into play. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues Cam and Chris, who are going to walk us through this new paradigm applying zero trust principles specifically to OT and how technologies like Dragos and BlastWave can work together to help you reduce risk and improve control in your environment. And I'd also like to add, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we will make sure that Cam and Chris get those answered on air. So Cam, take it away. Cam, you're on mute.
I hate it when that happens. Thanks very much. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm Cam Cullen, the CMO of BlastWave. And what Eric talked about is actually really important, and it kind of leads to the start of the conversation. And that is, why is zero trust in OT important? I will talk a little more later about some of the differences between OT and IT. But I think even if we take a step back, I wanted to look at the macro of what's happening in the world today, specifically for the federal space, and why zero trust is potentially the right solution going forward for all of the federal agencies. So the first thing I'll touch upon is that vulnerabilities that are occurring in IT and OT systems, and very specifically, a lot of the security systems that have traditionally protected OT and IT continue to skyrocket. The systems that are expected to protect you are actually used as attack vectors when it comes to getting into your systems. I think the last statistics I've seen is that around 75% of attacks on OT are lateral movements from IT. So it is important to recognize that you do need a big wall between the two of them to make sure that you don't have leakage from one environment to the next. And I think what's concerning for this audience specifically, when we look at the target of these attacks, the US is by far the #1 target country in the world. There are others, obviously, that are getting touched upon, but over 53% of the attacks, according to Forescout, are targeted at the US. And for the federal audience, what should concern you just as much as that is that the largest target industry in the first half of this year is the government. So as you can see down here, the government has a larger bar than any other sector in the market. We know that is a critical infrastructure as part of this. And if you take a look at even some of the other industries that are above that, these are agencies and industries that provide support to government agencies. For example, I just got back from the DFIDIC conference, and one of the comments that was made are things like the water utilities, energy are often provided off base by third parties or local utilities. So having your energy and your utilities attacked could come through a secondary connection to an external link. And I think what people don't appreciate, and certainly Dragos can attest to this because of the monitoring that they'll do, and Chris will talk about that some more, but this is an example from Forescout where they actually put for 90 days, they created a fake water treatment plant honeypot, which basically they put something online, didn't advertise it, it wasn't under registration, there wasn't a web page where people would do research on it. And over 90 days, this water treatment plant honeypot received almost 1.5 million requests, about 16,000 a day or 11 per minute. So I just want to pause for a second and think about that. A unadvertised, unknown set of IPs was scanned at a rate of 11 per minute to see what was there and if there were any known vulnerabilities to that. That sounds petrifying, but hold your thought, I'm going to make it worse in just a minute. But the result of what we see in things like this are, as was mentioned by Eric, the attacks are just daily. The news has regular reports on cyber attacks that are affecting not just the IT and data breaches, but halts manufacturing. You see, and the UNFI hack, there were shelves that were empty because they had no way to get their food out to their stores. There have been tons of water system attacks, water specifically being one of the most challenging OT spaces because literally the equipment there is 50 years old in some cases, and is very, very old and won't get updated anytime soon because you can't take these systems down. And now when we look at the current environment, the bad news here is that it's probably just going to get worse. The UK National Security Center did a study last year of how Gen AI is going to amplify cyber attack capability. I'm not going to talk about cyber defense here necessarily. I want to focus on the cyber attack side. because the problem with what Gen AI is doing, and I'll point back to that 11 per minute essentially attack ratio that we saw in the water treatment plant, it's making it automated for a hacker to find out what systems are on the network, what is reachable from the internet, what is available. They can use Gen AI to discover what the threats are, or what the known vulnerabilities are to those systems, and basically how to exploit them without doing any manual work whatsoever. In fact, at the DFIDIC conference that I was at, the CEO of Huntress, who does quite a bit of security investigations and protection for their customers, his comment was that the criminal gangs that use AI today don't get involved in the hacking process until they determine what the ransom should be. They have automated this so much so that they literally get a report from their system that says, okay, here's the system that you can hack, here's what the available, here's the company, here's how much revenue they have, here's what their cyber insurance plan is for. So they know going in what that company is completely, because it's all been done automated reconnaissance. So the two specific things I wanted to highlight from this are reconnaissance, which I just talked about, as well as social engineering, which essentially comes down to passwords. So both of these two kind of what I would call front-end initial attack vectors are being massively uplifted by Gen AI for both highly capable actors as well as people who really don't know what they're doing, but know how to issue prompts from a Chat GPT or Gemini or one of the other systems that's out there. So the message here for AI isn't use AI to protect yourself. It's understand how AI is going to be used against you and make sure that the systems you use to put in for defense can actually protect you from these attack vectors. Which leads me to what is the best way to do that? And the real answer here really comes down to zero trust. Zero trust does not allow unfettered access to resources. It does require a user to make sure that they authenticate their identity, not just their username and password, but their identity. This has been adopted widely across the federal space. NIST obviously created the zero trust standards and continues to release content like the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, which talks about how you put together a comprehensive solution. And actually what we're talking about here with BlastWave and Dragos are 3 of these 5 critical pieces that we're going to talk about to help you protect your network from the outside, as well as monitor what's happening on the inside in case you have to do a zero trust assume breach. So assume that there could be a problem in your network. And one of the things that Eric mentioned was the difference between IT and OT. And I won't go into huge amounts of detail. There's lots of content out on the internet and blogs, including on BlastWaves, about what the difference is between the two. But I think it's always important when you're protecting something to understand the North Star. And in the IT world, it's about protecting data. In the OT world, it's about staying operational. My goal as an OT network is to keep the plant running, keep the water flowing, keep the oil and gas pumping, essentially. You want to keep that network operational. And the biggest difference when you take a step back from a security perspective is thinking of IT, that I have a lot of users, a small number of devices, and a small number of servers, again, relatively speaking, that you are trying to let people access, but only access in very, what you would call trusted or secure ways to get into the systems. OT flips that around. You have many devices. We're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially even millions in some of the large manufacturing plants. As an example, a small water treatment facility may have 100 OT devices on it for almost no users, for hundreds or a few hundred users or 1,000 consumers that are attached to that. You have very few servers and you have very few users. So technologically speaking, zero trust is easier for OT when you can combine the ability to generate an asset inventory, feed that into a system, and make sure that the few users you have are protected adequately. So if you're interested to talk more about this, happy to do an offline discussion, but there are significant differences in what you're asking for from your security system for OT and IT. I won't stay on this slide. Anyone that's in DoD, there are zero trust requirements for OT that are coming out. They're not officially out yet, so I'll skip on by this, but DoD does recognize that OT does require differences than what you're getting from the IT zero trust requirements that are already been mandated out in DoD. So what I want to talk a little bit now, just for a few minutes on, is how BlastWave looks at protecting your network, specifically from these AI vectors and for OT. We start with a concept of shielding your OT network from external attacks. So we want to prevent hackers from discovering and surveilling your network. So I talked about that, the ability to just do automated reconnaissance. We want to try and get rid of that. We want to let the right people in with least privilege remote access, and make sure that we only allow those people in based upon passwordless access, and make sure they can only access the systems they want. And even if someone on the inside gets into the network and decides they want to be malicious because they've turned bad or they've been bribed or whatever it may be, we want to prevent lateral movement by those users to get to places they're not supposed to, as well as not let compromised devices infect other OT systems. And I'll just put it kind of in simple terms as one way to look at it. It's really a 360-degree view. You have hackers coming in from the north, where we're actually going to do what we call network cloaking, and I'll just touch upon what that is for a second. From the employee side of the house on the west, you have authorized employees coming into the network that want to get into the network that you want to allow them in, but only allow them certain access. From the east side of this, you may have those valid employees now in the network, but I don't want them to have access to things that they do not want to do, or I need to segment my network properly. And then the final is you're going to have people who come in to maintain systems, or they have physical access. What I want to make sure is those maintenance users can only access the devices they're supposed to, and when they're accessing those devices, that they can't go off and do bad things, or if one of the devices that they're maintaining gets infected with malware, it can't spread amongst the rest of the network. So it's really, when you look at this protection, it's not just one system and one technology to protect them, it's all of them. Network cloaking is essentially the ability to make your network undiscoverable from outside sites. And in the DoD environment, you would think this almost as a virtual air gap. Anyone that's ever used products like the KG175 or the KG75 or one of the encryptors that you put in front of your classified environments, I'm still using the regular internet to run my traffic, but unless you have the right keys and the right authentication, you can't see anything that is behind that device. So you're creating this virtual air gap, and I don't let my OT devices access the internet unless very explicitly allowed to for a very good reason. And even then, it's usually over a secure connection as well. The second part of that is secure remote access. We at BlastWave hate passwords. Passwords are literally the #1 way that most networks are hacked into, and the access is gained. You steal people's credentials. If you have no credentials, then phishing doesn't work. If you have no passwords to steal, if there are no way to get to a system, even with an open password in clear text. So many OT devices, for example, don't support encryption, and they have default passwords that may have never been changed, or maybe they cannot be changed. What we allow you to do is that the only people that even know those devices exist on the network or can get to them and see them are those that are given the right access, and who have to provide very strong passwordless PKI access into that as well. So it's a way to make sure that those systems aren't accessed by anyone that shouldn't be. And then finally, segmentation. And I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about segmentation, just in the diagram, it is both north, south, and east, west. So your internal users should only be able to see the things that they're allowed to see. The devices on the network should not be able to connect to anything else. One of the common deployments for OT environments is that layer 2 devices, all the networks are just flat layer 2 environments. So a single device that gets compromised can DDoS the rest of the network and spread malware willingly just by doing ping sweeps and figuring out who's available on the network and attacking them one by one. Segmentation allows you to manage that and even control connections at layer 2 from one device to another in a port isolation mode for segmentation. So there are really good methodologies to use to protect even those flat layer 2 networks in a federal environment where you're required to do segmentation, but you can't afford the time and the money to install firewalls everywhere in your network to manage that. So the final thing I'll touch upon, just an example, a customer that we did in DoD, an Air Force water treatment facility. It literally took 4 hours to install the system. It was completed in less than 60 days. We had 91 different devices with 89 different segments. So what that means is almost every single device was on its own unique segment. So the only thing it could talk to directly was the Blast Shield gateway, which then mediated the connections to any other device or system on the network so that no device could cause anything else on the network with a challenge. And as we said, you can see we had 20 users with passwordless authentication, but almost 100 devices. So the balance of the two were pretty heavily weighted toward the device side of the house. In this case, it was almost 5 to 1. And although we didn't comply with 100% of the zero trust requirements, when you took a step back, it was over 70% of the requirements, which really are heavy in both the protection as well as in the detection and asset discovery part of that, which kind of leads me to our partner here with this Dragos. So if anyone that follows SANS and the SANS 5 critical ICS controls, what I've just talked about are 3 of those controls. That's being able to defend your architecture, understanding the vulnerabilities of the systems on your network and how to protect them, as well as multi-factor authentication. What I'd like to do now is turn the webinar over to Chris from Dragos, who's going to talk about some of these other challenges. And specifically, Chris is going to focus on the lessons that have been learned by Dragos in deploying zero trust in a federal environment. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Yep. So there's very few of the deployments within the Department of Defense for Dragos and especially the zero trust ones that I haven't personally had my hands on. So I'm going to kind of give you some of the issues that kind of popped up that a lot of people may not be, considering when things kind of go through. So the very first one is we had a mission partner observing anomalous traffic traversing their OT control servers. Essentially, there was something just kind of moving around and adding executables or services within the system, but they were unable to kind of co-locate what service that currently was running. They contacted a few of the vendors, including us, to see if it was maybe some of our tools that were causing the issue. Even contacted their higher level detection part of their organization, and they had no idea what was going on. In the end, it ended up being a IT security tool that the IT team had installed onto these servers, and it was acting in accordance to how they planned it. It's just no one informed the OT security team. So where this kind of comes in place is to make sure that you have all the tools that you're currently running within your network or on your key infrastructure. Make sure you have those documented and make sure that everyone is on the same page. Can you go ahead and proceed the slide, please? Yeah, so here we are. So communication is key between the IT and OT SOC teams, right? Want to avoid going down these rabbit holes and burning man hours if we really don't need to. And then each level of the incident response team needs to be aware of their area of responsibility, right? So where this kind of comes in place is as that OT security team was trying to communicate up to the higher levels, they didn't reach the right person to kind of see what this tool was, and this all could have been all avoided if the communication lines were there between the IT and OT teams. All right, go ahead, next slide, please. And proceed it a little bit further. All right, so yeah, so this next situation was, and the kind of a key message to this lesson is be flexible, right? So work with your security vendors and make sure that maybe something, you may have a unique environment. That doesn't mean that you have to stray completely away from the vendor tools. Just work with them in order to make sure that, they may not be officially supported, but, flexibility is kind of there, right? So what this mission partner was doing was they had a unique hypervisor, and a lot of the tools were not directly supported. So we worked along with them and the other vendors to ensure that, this customer will be able to get the visibility that they needed for within their OT environment. We essentially worked with the team, and we shared notes and worked together. And we essentially, both us and the other vendor were able to test and verify compatibility, and worked with Dragos, or we actually were working with Dragos to scale their operationality. So lesson learned, the answer is, is it supported? Doesn't have to be no, right? Let's have that flexibility, because especially within the OT security world, a lot of this is brand new. So, they're not going to have the same maturity level for a lot of the security vendor tools. So let's have that flexibility, and, let's get to yes and get them covered. And then also continuing open communication is key and true to the partnership, right? This works for, not only security vendors, but then also between vendors, but then also for the customers themselves. All right, go ahead, next slide, please. And finally, this one seems to rear its head quite frequently, is a mission partner deployed Dragos platform and realized over 500 assets were missing from the asset inventory, right? So leverage those free tools that Dragos, BlastWave, and security vendors are offering, especially when it comes to support, because there's no real reason to suffer in silence. Make sure you utilize those tools to the full extent that they're available. And, for this one, they had significant reduced visibility for over a month after deployment. And really all it was a sensor adjusting where the sensor was placed, right? This could go with Dragos or your vendor of choice, but work with those teams. Make sure and then also try to make sure you understand how traffic flows through your environment, both north to south, east to west, because having that visibility is key to making sure you have a defensible architecture. And like I said, leverage the no cost or paid for vendor support to evaluate device placement. And then finally, to add kind of maturity to your defensible architecture, use the available cyber threat intelligence to aid in sensor placement, right? What are your most likely avenues of attack? Your avenues for the attack to kind of come through, or, and make sure that those paths are hardened to the best of their ability. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So kind of recommendations we've seen that we're kind of making to our customers is to try to, understand your architecture. If we kind of look at the map on the left, you can kind of see where everything kind of lives, right? And we want to be able to see both the traffic traversing coming into these two networks between level 3 and level 4, but then also, or level 2 and level 3, but then also what is happening within level 2 going east to west, right? So optimize your architecture for defense and visibility. Sensor placement is going to be key when it comes to getting the visibility that you need. Again, use the cyber threat intelligence to inform sensor placement and hunt hypothesis. Like the slides previously said, the most likely avenue approaches could be coming from level 4 going into level 3. So you want to make sure that is hardened not only with your standard security tools, but then also zero trust, to make sure that not only employees but also vendors that are coming through the network are using the prescribed paths that they are intended to use. And then know your terrain, right? So especially when it comes to things like baselines and that kind of, and incident responses and that kind of thing. Know work if the OT team isn't the same people who are working on the systems. Make sure those people are always in the room or available so that you can ask them questions to say, hey, this is normal or this is not normal kind of thing. Next slide, please. Again, so a few of the other key points we had was communication is key, right? Make sure that there's open communication between the upper and lower levels or between IT and OT security teams or even higher echelons. Take maximum advantage of previous efforts, right? No real need to, rebuild the wheel. Work with previously, known projects, or if you're trying to get things certified, work with those existing authority to operate. And don't delay deploying or using visibility capabilities, right? So there's not going to be a real silver bullet when it comes to a lot of these operations and securing your environment, but obviously use the tools that are available and the lessons learned from those who have kind of done it before, and bring that visibility into your environment. All right, next slide, please.
All right, I think that's all right. Perfect. So I just to kind of tie it all together. If you take the stuff that Chris just talked about, what you can see is he talked about having an incident response plan, know how to communicate. I think this is really important, and I think it's the part of cybersecurity that maybe gets neglected the most. Is if you don't know what you're going to do if you get attacked, and again, remembering that zero trust fundamental says assume breach. This is one of the first things that needs to happen, and you need to understand as part of this, what are the most important parts of your network and how do they need to be protected and what will you do, which helps you create number two, your defensible architecture, where you're actually deciding how you're going to protect those assets. And to protect them, you need to know what they are, which is number three. And I think one of the things Chris talked about, he mentioned as an example, that they didn't have 500 assets. Remember that in a zero trust environment, if an asset doesn't get enabled, it is not communicating. So this is part of why doing a very solid asset inventory and understanding where those assets are a very important part of your defensive architecture, because that also leads you to your vulnerability, understanding what the risks are, which dictate the policies that need to use to protect those. For example, we've seen a lot of what I would call a virtual patch type environments where I know that a particular device is vulnerable on a particular protocol. So let me just block that protocol from ever accessing that device ever again. So it's part of that overall activity. And finally, you want to make sure that only the right users or the authenticated identities access those networks through multi-factor authentication. So what we wanted to kind of leave you with, and then I'll turn it back over to Eric and Gordon. But when you combine the capabilities of visibility that Dragos has with our knowledge of the cyber threats and the vulnerabilities that exist in these devices, with BlastWave's ability to now take that, turn that into a protection architecture and eliminate the key vectors that are being leveraged by the threat actors, that sets you off on the right path towards a federal compliance with zero trust specifications, no matter which agency you're in, but leveraging those NIST standards as part of that. So I'll now give it back to Eric or Gordon, whoever next. I don't know if we have any questions yet.
Yeah, Cam, actually, I want to go back to something you talked about before, and I appreciate, you really expanding upon how we set the stage, talking about IT and OT. But you highlighted at one point the honeypot use case with the water treatment plant. And so let's go back to the 0 day before the BlastWave, before the Dragos was installed, and let's kind of dissect this use case for the audience a little bit. So in that we were particularly focused on the water treatment part, but I would assume there's other OT systems in that network that might have been subject to the same type of scanning, right? So, for example, building management or power or things like that. So, is it common that those OT systems will ride on the same network? Would they be completely segregated from one another? And so, when you step into a situation like that and you do your initial assessment 0 day, what does that look like? And what are some of the recommendations you give almost immediately, especially if they've discovered that they've been exploited?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And when you look at, especially in the federal space, and I'll use a military base as an example because it's the perfect one. Typically, that infrastructure for all of their OT does ride on yes, it crosses over the normal base network, but you do want to segment and manage that by its own network itself. So you'll have on that OT network, you'll have building management. You will have, if there's logistics, if there's water, if there's power, those typically, you're not going to build out a separate infrastructure for all of those when they're all in the same building, for example. So you definitely segment them out. They will run, and they're all basically, unless you have the right zero trust protection, those are the same type of environments that can be scanned. It also is worth mentioning that don't forget that a lot of these devices have built-in phone home capability. So we've seen this with webcams specifically. So security networks, especially in, again, the building management space, are often run over that same physical infrastructure. They have a tendency to phone home statistics to a server that may be in China or maybe in some other country, which does create, because the connection was created from the inside, it creates a covert channel that can be used for command and control to get into the network and to use that, maybe that camera as a launch off part. So every type of OT network that has any connected devices are vulnerable to this, and they're often on the exact same physical infrastructure as every other part of that OT network as well.
So, Chris, staying with this use case, kind of dropping in 0 day, Dragos is coming on site. How does Dragos attack these threats and these attacks that Cam was highlighting in this particular water treatment use case and the surrounding OT systems that go with it?
Absolutely. So the threat detection, especially when it comes, to like a threat behavior, right? So it's definitely going to be key to have those kind of detections within the system, and it's highly, because attackers can use 0 days in many different ways. And so it's important to not only look at the signature itself, but then also the behavior that the exploit is actually taking, right? Because signatures can be changed super easy. I mean, attacking 101 is to try to change your malware so you can avoid antivirus signatures. So it's extremely important that whatever you're using to monitor your security network is that it uses a heuristic view threat detection and can do continuous monitoring within your environment.
Okay, so when you guys drop in on day 0, something's gone down, customer calls you, how long does it take to implement both systems and get feedback back? But also, are there key tools in the customer's toolbox that you're looking to interface with? Maybe it's a SIM, maybe it's some sort of other security product that you want to be able to glean information from that makes your job a lot easier, maybe a lot faster as well to begin to interoperate with that environment?
Absolutely. So obviously we would want to be in place prior to the incident because it makes it a lot easier using the threat detections and everything built into and the threat intelligence built into the platform. But obviously any tools that are available it could be anything from, other third-party tools. I mean, a SIM that they have currently in place. Just use whatever available information or even forensic information to help gain access to how the attack occurred and how everything kind of went down within the environment in order to either reverse or recover from any kind of incident that could have occurred.
So, Cam, when you parachute in, is there something you're looking for?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly enough, what we're looking for are people like Dragos. So if you have an environment where there's already a good asset inventory, a BlastWave installation can be done literally in an hour. It takes no time at all to import that asset inventory. The devices are just already grouped. We know what they are. This is this PLC, this HMI. You can create the communication paths because you understand what needs to talk to what, and you can very quickly get that network up and running with the right access for even the users at that point in time. So it does not take us a long time. And what's beautiful, I talked about the segmentation, the software-defined segmentation. It can be an iterative process. So it's not like you're going to install a BlastWave system in there and immediately segment down to the device level for your entire network. You can do that over time without any physical changes, without changing IP addresses on the devices. You can, as you discover, for example, if Dragos points out that there's a new vulnerability that's we know about for this particular device, we can shunt that off or segment it off so that systems that might be able to exploit that or spread that that malware can no longer use that as a communication path between the two of them. So the path that we look for most commonly is to have someone who has an asset inventory system like what Dragos has already installed in the network, and that makes our deployments very, very fast.
Well, and I'm glad you went there because that's a really interesting segue into that arrow chart that you created showing us the north, south, east, west, and the different pieces, especially of BlastWave and how the OT network, at least from a zero trust perspective, works. And so I'm sure a lot of people are probably thinking the same way I am, which is, let's pull on one of those threads, just one of the arrows. And I actually saw it twice in there, which was the words network cloaking. And so it brings me back to, 10 years ago, IT, there was another big company out there that used to have these radio ads that said, you can't attack what you can't see. And so cloaking, that term, even if we think Star Trek wise, right, we're making something disappear, we're making it invisible. So how does, first of all, BlastWave network cloaking work? But how does it work with a detection system like Dragos? How do you make those two things interoperate when something's supposed to be quote unquote invisible on the OT network?
So good question. And anyone that's into network cloaking, we have a white paper out that describes in excruciating detail how it actually works. But the simple answer is network cloaking creates a secure SDN essentially, or a software-defined perimeter, which is a secure overlay on top of your existing network. So all of your devices remain the same, the same addresses, same connectivity they have today. Hopefully you have a managed switch, which makes life easier. And what we do is we actually, the term I use is we weaponize NAT, or network address translation, so that the only way to get through to a device is through the BlastWave product. So we control, we effectively act as an overlay onto that network, and it doesn't matter what site you're on. We can create a segment for that site. So to your second part of your question, which is about how do we interface with Dragos, one of the beauties of network cloaking is I can have 1,000 devices across 100 different sites that all believe they were in the same layer 2 broadcast domain because we've created that overlay. So in a Dragos type environment, they would see that OT segment as a flat layer 2 network and be able to see the communication between all of those devices just by having access into that particular segment. What it really does is helps optimize the understanding of what are the different zones and conduits for those that are familiar with 62443 specifications on how segmentation is done, by grouping those things into these kind of domains where they communicate, which helps focus the threat detection on particular device types. Or, in the example we just talked about before, maybe I have the base management system under one segment, I have water under another zone, I have power under another zone. So it allows you to create these so that these sites cannot be seen from the outside because the user doesn't have the zero trust access to get into those different segments. Again, which is passwordless, requires PKI, and uses things like the same thing you use for Apple Pay and Google Pay when you go use your phone, your mobile phone and wallet. So that's kind of how we look at it. It is a secure overlay technology which mimics an SDN, but uses zero trust as the entry point to that.
So Chris, on your end, when you're interacting with BlastWave, when it's in cloak mode, how does that represent itself for you, and how do you interface with those devices?
So essentially what we would have to do is we would utilize the integration between the two products and try to have at least the alerts coming through BlastWave in order to have those come into the Dragos platform in order to be to be able to monitor those from either Dragos themselves, or just kind of add that kind of full visibility to what event currently happened within, or what currently happened within that event or incident.
Okay.
And again, we use the Dragos feeds to be able to create those zones and conduits, because they know the devices and the vulnerability. So that interaction between us is really critical to getting your network set up properly.
Yeah, and it's truly what Gordon likes to say, a better together story, as you describe it that way, and as we decompose this use case. And I'm sure there's tons more use cases just like this that we could get into with anybody here on the chat, like that maybe resonates closer to them, where they're dealing with HVAC or power or water in this case, like we were talking about. But there is one sort of hanging Chad in this conversation still out there. And Kim writes, you talked about, maybe this is a touchy subject, the timetable for the zero trust specification coming out. Cam, do you have any idea on the ETA for that?
So it will be this fall, is what the CIO's office is planning. It's for lack of a better word, just like you would say in your relationship status, it's complicated. The challenge when it comes to for the zero trust for OT really is that in an OT environment, you don't want to have IT resources, but in a DoD environment, it's highly probable that you may have some IT things sitting on an OT network that still need to comply with some of the IT requirements. So we expect them this fall. It probably shouldn't be terribly long from now. The question really comes down to, how are these things going to be implemented, and what's the timeline going to be for when the goal is to make people comply with them? And as you know, as I just said earlier about IT and OT, IT can patch things every Tuesday, and they have a 3 to 5 year refresh cycle. OT, that could be a 10 to 20 year refresh. So it's not like you can just say, I have all these new OT requirements and they have to be done by next year, because there will be some build up to get to them, because the OT networks move much, much slower than IT side.